How can public policy, private enterprise, and smart regulation work together to build a stronger New Jersey economy? This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Growth Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. Today we're diving into the intersection of public policy, economic development, and business growth in New Jersey. NJCPA CEO A.J. Johnson recently spoke with Eric Brophy, former Deputy Chief of Staff for Economic Growth to Governor Phil Murphy, and now co-chair of the new Government and Regulatory Law Group at CSG, one of the state's top law firms. They discuss Eric's time in the governor's office shaping state economic initiatives, his new role at CSG, and what's ahead for New Jersey's business and regulatory landscape. Here's the discussion.
Welcome, Eric. It's so great to have you here and to see you. So thank you for being here.
Great, thank you.
So why don't we jump right in?
Sure.
Reflecting on your time as Deputy Chief of Staff for Economic Growth for Governor Murphy, what would you say was the biggest policy or political challenge you faced?
Yeah, I think clearly, and I think most people would agree with this, offshore wind was a huge disappointment. It was a huge challenge to start with. Disappointing that we weren't able to get it over the finish line. I think, it still remains a very important clean energy initiative. I think, at some point, I'm hopeful that it'll come back in the future, whether it's New Jersey or one of the other coastal states. But I think offshore wind is really a critical tool to get to 100% clean energy. Whether that goal is realistic or not, I'm not sure. But I think, it was a confluence of issues that kind of, some were out of the governor's control, some were in his control. I think, COVID certainly put a big damper on it. It was really hard when supply chains got diminished during COVID. Companies started to rethink their investment strategies. Orsted and some of the other companies started to pull back. And I think it was kind of all of these issues coming together where it just wasn't viable going forward. And then, of course, President Trump coming in and saying that, he's going to withdraw all the approvals. Obviously, it was kind of the death knell for New Jersey. I'm hopeful that in the future it'll come back. And I think there is a chance. I think at some point, whether it's under, this current presidential term or the next, that there's going to be an opportunity for offshore wind to come back. It was popular for some people, but if you live in a coastal town, it was not popular.
Right.
So living in that area of the state in Monmouth County, I know that was a very unpopular issue.
Can we stay on that for just a second and talk about there's strong resistance for it and against it? Can you just share for our audience kind of the pros and cons around that?
Yeah. We got some very strong lobbying efforts for it at the beginning. I think when word started to get out that it was going to be real and that it's, was actually taking shape, I think that's when a lot of the anti-groups started coming out. I think, the messaging, we didn't do a great job of messaging. I think we could have been more proactive in the way that we put it out to the public. And we could have been more proactive and had better messaging around why it's good for the environment and why it's the right thing to do. I think there was some distractions, some red herrings, the whale issues, and those were not really supported by a lot of the facts. And I think that's something that we also did not push back well enough on. That's something that we were not good at messaging on. That wasn't the real cause. But I think, and I also think we were using some state property to do it. So some of the onshore cabling was coming across the Seagirt base, naval base there, Coast Guard base there. And I think that was a huge problem too, because we were using state property to do it. And I think that gave people fodder to oppose it.
Definitely not a small issue.
Not a small issue, and not a cheap issue either.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive endeavor.
Yeah. So, that makes me think about New Jersey as a whole and how we stay competitive. How do you think we as a state can best compete with, our neighboring states for major business investment?
Yeah. I mean, I think we did a really good job in being creative and coming up with some of our made some really good decisions on our creative tax incentive programs to keep companies here. I don't think that people like Tim Sullivan or Kathleen Coviello, who's somebody that a lot of people don't know, who's really kind of the brains behind a lot of our tax incentive programs and the state business tax incentive programs. Those policies, I think, attributed to keeping the state at a level where we didn't have a net loss. We had a net gain of jobs and new businesses in the state. And I think the administration hasn't gotten enough credit for that, given the fact that we had COVID, given the fact that we're on the cusp of potentially a recession. All of those things, I think, these tax incentive programs that are built to last for the next 7 or 8 to 10 years, and will remain in place under the next administration. I think there has not been enough credit given for those. I think we've built something like we created something like a net of 38,000 jobs over the past 8 years. So that's new jobs minus jobs that have been lost in the state. So I think our net new jobs, I have the numbers close to 400,000 new jobs over the past 8 years. And then 340,000 maybe loss of jobs. The net has been about 38,000, which is so probably going to be surprising to a lot of people that the state is actually doing better than we were 8 years ago on job creation.
Sure. So that's a great point. I think what's probably on the minds of our members is, the corporate tax rate.
Yep.
And the fact that there may be this job creation, but then as you look to attract business here in the state, that's kind of the thing that's top of mind for them.
Yeah,
So,
and look, I can say with most certainty that if the state did not have an issue with transit, that the corporate business tax would not have come back. That was really the sole driver of it. And I can tell you we had a lot of discussions, a lot of battles about it in the office, about whether it was the right thing to do and how we're going to fill that $900 million gap at transit. I think there are more that, it's more than just creating jobs, right? So a lot of the discussions that I've had with business owners when I was in the governor's office was about, we need certainty. We need things to be made a little bit easier. I do think eliminating some of the regulatory burdens in the state is something that needs to happen. My group, I was in charge of economic growth, and in my portfolio included figuring out ways to fix some of those regulatory hurdles. We worked on a few different programs with DCA, trying to eliminate or make things a little bit easier on the construction side for developers who are building residential or building some commercial. It's a great endeavor. It's hard to get there. I don't think the public understands how difficult it is to navigate the totality of state government and 5 layers down and
Sure.
the amount of pushback that you get because it's change. It's something new and people don't like change generally.
So our members are particularly concerned about the state boards and funding of that as well. So, there's just a lot of moving parts to it.
And agreed. I mean, I think, another problem also is the inability to have filled a lot of those spots, a lot of those boards that are empty currently, right? There's a lot of positions that are vacant. there's finite resources, and I think, whoever the governor is, whether it's Phil Murphy or, whether it's Jack Ciattarelli next or it's Mikey Sherrill, I think they have some hard decisions to make. And where you deploy those resources, I think, is a really, really hard thing to come up with.
So you've talked a lot about a couple of things that you've seen and you've been a part of. I find it interesting, when we talk about eliminating regulatory burdens.
Mm-hmm.
Is there one initiative or, area, let's say regulations, where you wish it was more visible or known?
A couple things. I mean, I'll pivot a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I do think one policy initiative that I think this administration, and it may happen in the future, but so far has not gotten really much credit. Again, I think it's a messaging issue. They have not promoted it enough to the general public. But the use of strategic innovation centers in the state. So the governor's deployed, I think, something like 10 or 11 strategic innovation centers. They all focus on different sectors. So, for example, there's one for fintech, which is and that's housed in Jersey City or Hoboken, I believe, at Stevens Institute of Technology. There's HACS, which is in Newark, which is advanced manufacturing. The whole purpose of these strategic innovation centers is like a true P3, where you have state government entering with private entities, both investing, actual dollars investing, that teams up with a university or some higher ed institution. The AI Hub is another example of it at Princeton. EDA has invested significant amounts of money, millions of dollars into these strategic innovation centers, and basically they're incubators to build out the new types of companies, new types of industries, based on each sector. So it's really a creative idea, and the governor's belief was always that it's going to be really hard for us to bring back car manufacturers to New Jersey. Like, that's very unlikely to happen. Right. But we are really good at innovation. We have a really smart talent pool. It probably makes sense to have them use their brain power to create new industries, like Bellworks, J&J, the pharmaceutical industry in New Jersey. Like, those things are really strong industry leaders. His vision is, in 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to have an entirely new demographic of companies in the state. And I think he doesn't get enough credit for that.
Okay.
and he may, like, maybe in the future, when those companies start birthing and start growing, that, somebody will say, hey, that was a great idea to do that.
And to your point, I think just in terms of awareness, I'm not sure how many people are aware of that. To me, that was very interesting to hear, because I've heard bits and pieces about the activity that's happening across the state, but I didn't realize that it was around these particular sectors.
Yeah.
So.
And the governor targeted specific sectors on purpose. Like, those are growth industries that we've seen. And don't forget, the governor was he's a business guy at heart, right? Like, he came from industry. He understands how to grow an economy and how to grow business. So, and how to properly invest funds. So I think that was really important. I don't know that we'll get that with the next governor, somebody who can think in those terms. None of the candidates kind of have that background.
Well, I'm sure this will be of interest to our members to get more information on it and see how they can, be involved. Because obviously our members are represented across various industries, startups, you name it. So very interesting. Okay, so what would you say are the misconceptions really about engaging with state agencies, and then what can we do, to help kind of correct that narrative, if you will?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a misconception that businesses will have the ability to make a call to a state agency and basically a cold call and just get the result that they want. It takes a little bit more than that. I think it's really helpful if, and a lot of lobbyists deploy lobbyists to help out, to help them navigate state government or the legislature, or, get to the goal that they're trying to achieve. I think that, having the ability, and I'll just speak from our terms in our firm, we're building out this new group right now. Patrick O'Reilly and I are building out this government affairs group. I think the unique perspective we have is that not only do we know and have the connections to the exact people to go to, the right people to get the answers, but we've also built those relationships. Anybody can know who the people are, but if you don't have a relationship with them, they're not going to answer your call. Patrick and I have spent a very long time building those relationships, and I think that's something that we're going to be able to capitalize on going forward for our clients, and we'll be able to navigate probably a little bit more nimbly than some of the other firms that are out there.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit more about your role, and I'm just curious, like the relationships and all of that. Can you talk about your role as chair of government
Sure.
and regulatory law group?
Yeah. So, this is a new group that was formed with me coming into the firm, and just by background, Patrick O'Reilly, who's co-chairing the group with me, previously worked in the legislature. He after that worked for New Jersey Transit, then he worked at the Port Authority. So he has vast government experience before he came back to the law. So being able to understand, navigate not only legislation, how the legislative process works, but also he has that perspective. I have the perspective of, how the executive branch navigates some legislation or some other, whatever issue comes up for our clients. I think the firm thought that it was a good idea to build out this practice. We see some of the other larger firms in the state out there starting to build out their government affairs practices. And I think, CSG really thought that it was something that they needed to have a hand in. They needed to get involved in, because it's a big market. There's a lot of opportunity in this market. And we know that some of our clients have not gotten serviced in that way, being able to properly lobby. We have a few registered lobbyists in the firm already, but it hasn't been formalized. Now that we have a formalized group, we'll be able to capitalize on that and advertise that, and kind of show clients that we're also working in that space.
Sounds like a great opportunity. Congratulations.
Thank you. We hope so.
How long have you been in the role for now?
I think this is week 6, maybe. So.
Hot off the press.
Yeah, exactly.
So one stated purpose of CSG's new group is helping clients navigate procurement, regulatory compliance, and pay-to-play rules.
Yeah.
From your insider's vantage point, what are the most common stumbling blocks for private entities in dealing with New Jersey state government, and how will your group be uniquely positioned to address them?
Yeah.
I know you just mentioned the deep relationships.
Yeah, I think that's, what I'll say is, and we plan to build this group out larger than just Patrick and I, right? So I think as time goes on, we'll be able to grow and bring some other people. There's a change in administration, so we're going to see some more people coming out of state government, not only in our firm, but they'll end up in other places. I would say, it's really about the relationships that I talked about before that, Patrick and I have built, and Patrick, just being a lawyer, has still maintained a lot of those relationships within state government. I think, it's one thing to know, I have a client who needs help on a DEP issue. Okay, it's one thing to know that, John Smith is the guy who's in charge of that particular issue. It's a different thing to know, like, what town that guy lives in, or that his wife just had a baby, or like knowing those personal things and having built those personal relationship, I think, is something that we are uniquely positioned. I don't think there's any other firm out there doing this type of work, law firm doing this type of work, who can say that they have those skills or have those relationships. So I think we're uniquely positioned because of that.
I can understand that. Our members would relate to that
Yeah.
because, it's not just about the technical information that you provide, but also the relationships. So that makes sense.
Right. And the other part is we are lucky enough to be in a law firm that has a lot of really smart people too. So we can handle the legal side too.
Right, exactly. Great. So looking ahead, what major economic or regulatory trends do you expect to see, shaping New Jersey in the next 3 to 5 years or so?
I think undoubtedly housing is going to continue to be an issue, and energy. I think those two things are probably going to dominate the news over the next 5 to 10 years. I don't think we'll have a solution before that time. There's a lot to do. I think we're something like 200,000 housing units short in New Jersey at a minimum. That's a big problem. That's why housing's so expensive here. It's, rent costs are so high. Putting market influences aside, interest rates and all that, that's one part of it, not really related to the underbuilt infrastructure that we have in the state. So housing, we undoubtedly need more housing.
Yeah.
Energy is, I think people talk about energy all the time, and they blame AI and they blame, data centers for, the energy costs. If it were only that easy, that it was just those issues, again, it's a confluence of things. It's, we don't generate enough energy in the state. We have to import some of it. Over the past years, there was a really good write-up in New Jersey Monitor, I think yesterday or the day before, about giving answers why our energy issues are what they are. Some of the conclusions are it's a whole bunch of things. It's, closing some of the gas plants. I don't think coal is ever going to come back to New Jersey, but nuclear is something that's on the table, certainly, and Governor Murphy is totally in favor of nuclear, has said that many times. I think both candidates have said they're in favor of nuclear. I think it's a huge burden, and it's, a 10 to 15 year build to build a new full-size nuclear plant. That's hard, really expensive, looking at $20 to $30 billion to build a new plant. But I do think that probably the future is, and I think a lot of people agree with this, are small modular nuclear plants, which are, 6 to 10 billion. That's, I guess, a savings. But I think if you can build a bunch of those around the state, and you have companies who are willing to do it, you have a lot of these tech companies who want to build data centers, are willing to put the money in to build an SMR. Technology is probably not there yet, but are willing to put the money in to do it, to house their data centers. In my opinion, the state should cut a deal with some of those companies and say, we'll help on the permitting side if you are willing to give the state some of that power back into the grid.
So more of the private partnership.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And I think that'll be helpful too. The other thing that's not really talked about a lot, which I think is really concerning, is the frailty of our grid. I think that's something that really there needs to be investment. I don't know that the state can do it themselves because it's a very costly endeavor. We don't want to have something like what happened in Texas a few years ago happen in New Jersey. I don't think it will. I think we're in a little better position, but I think whoever the next governor is and whatever evolution of the BPU that they put into place, will need to focus on a strategy to deal with the grid.
Yeah, and you mentioned 2 major issues, and we're hearing about it in the campaigns.
Yeah.
So everyone can agree that these are very serious, complex issues. I think what will be the difference is the approach to these challenges facing the state, and then we'll see over the next several years what actually comes of that.
Yeah, and I think it'll be important. Two things I think will be important: where they deploy funding, and then what they do on the regulatory side. I think those are two major issues that they both candidates will have to come up with plans for that.
All right. My final question is, if you could wave a magic wand to improve one aspect of New Jersey's business climate, what would it be?
I think some of your viewers will be surprised at this answer, given the fact that I'm coming out of the Murphy administration. I think we need to cut the regulatory burdens. It's not as easy as everyone thinks. I think I've had a lot of questions about why don't we just eliminate, this type of regulatory rules or whatever. It's not that easy. I think there are unintended consequences that people don't recognize. However, I do think it's an important endeavor. I do think it's something that the state needs to focus on. I think DCA needs to focus on it. Part of the problem is home rule is a huge problem behind the regulatory structure. One of the things that I tried to accomplish with my team is where we could make meaningful changes, we did. So we did it on the construction side. So we tried to make it so that we could fast track some types of applications. We could cut out some of the burdens and try to take away some of the places where we thought municipalities would have an automatic no on something and put it in the hands of DCA. So that was state controlled. That is not usually a democratic thing that people will do but we thought it was important because, as I said before, housing is a huge problem. The whole goal behind eliminating some of these burdens is to get the housing built. I don't think you can do it in the current format that we have. I think somebody's going to have to make a decision on what rules we cut, or shorten timeframes, or make it a little bit easier. I would never advocate for giving expedited approvals on things. There have been some proposals, and I know there was a proposal. I think the speaker had a proposal some time ago about you could pay to get expedited approval. I'm like, that's not really there's a fairness issue there, an equity issue there. So the Murphy administration would never support that. But if there were ways, if you have a certain type of project, if you could cut some of those hurdles out, I think that would be really important.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the conversation today.
Yep, really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for listening or watching. Access the show notes for links to learn more about Eric and CSG's new government and regulatory law group, as well as the latest issues impacting New Jersey CPAs, businesses, and the economy.